A pregnant widow, fleeing the ghosts of her husband's past, takes a job as a caretaker at a remote mountain cabin, a job that no woman has ever survived for a single winter. What dark secret does the mountain hold, and why does the silence there feel more dangerous than any storm? Before we uncover the secrets of the Ironwood Mountains, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from today. Your support means everything. Now, let's begin. The wind howled through the mountain pass like a living thing, carrying with it the scent of snow and something else. Something that made Isadora Vance pull her threadbare shawl tighter around her swollen belly as she stood at the edge of the precipice, staring down at the cabin that would either save her life or end it. The structure below seemed impossibly small against the vast wilderness that surrounded it, smoke curling from its chimney in a thin gray line that disappeared into the pewter sky. She had walked for 3 days to reach this place, following directions scrawled on a piece of paper by a bartender in the last town, a man who had looked at her with a mixture of pity and something that might have been fear. "No woman has ever lasted a winter up there," he had said, his voice barely audible over the din of the saloon. "But the pay is good if you can stomach what needs doing." Isadora pressed her hand against her belly, feeling the child within her shift and turn. 4 months along now, and already her body was changing in ways that made her former life seem like a distant dream. The life where she had been Mrs. Richard Vance, wife of a respected banker in Silver Creek. The life that had ended 6 weeks ago when consumption finally claimed her husband, leaving her with nothing but debts and the growing certainty that she carried his child. The wind picked up again, and she could taste the coming storm on her tongue. Winter was settling into the high country early this year, and she had nowhere else to go. The other jobs she had applied for in town had all ended the same way. The moment her condition became apparent, doors closed and faces turned away. A pregnant widow was a burden no respectable household wanted to bear. But this job was different. This job was desperate enough to take anyone willing to do the work. She began her descent down the narrow trail that switched back through the pines, each step bringing her closer to whatever waited below. The cabin grew larger as she approached, and she could see now that it was well built, constructed from massive logs that had been carefully chinked. Smoke continued to rise from the stone chimney, and she caught glimpses of golden light flickering behind oiled paper windows. A man emerged from the tree line as she reached the bottom of the trail, and Isadora felt her breath catch in her throat. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a beard that had been trimmed, but not recently. His clothes were practical and well-worn, the kind that spoke of a man who worked with his hands and had little use for vanity. But it was his eyes that made her pause. They were the color of a winter sky, pale and penetrating, and they seemed to see straight through to her bones. Silas Croft, she thought, remembering the name the bartender had given her. The mountain man who lived alone and hired help for the winter months. The man who paid well and asked no questions, but whose employees never seemed to return to town come spring. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze taking in her condition and the worn state of her traveling clothes. When he spoke, his voice was rough from disuse but not unkind. "You would be Isadora Vance?" "Yes, sir." She straightened her spine, trying to project a confidence she did not feel. "I understand you have need of a housekeeper for the winter months." Silas Croft nodded slowly, still watching her with those unsettling pale eyes. "The work is hard. The isolation is harder. You certain you can handle what needs doing?" Isadora thought of the empty rooms she had left behind in Silver Creek, of the creditors who would come looking for payment she could never provide. She thought of the child growing inside her and the long winter ahead with no shelter and no hope. "I can handle whatever needs doing," she said, and was surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Silas studied her a moment longer, then turned toward the cabin. "Come then. Best get you settled before the weather turns." Isadora followed him across the clearing, noting the neat stacks of firewood, the well-maintained outbuildings, the garden plot carefully prepared for winter. Whatever else might be said about Silas Croft, he was clearly a man who planned ahead. The interior of the cabin was larger than she had expected, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area. A pot simmered over the fire, filling the air with the rich scent of venison stew. "Your room is there." Silas pointed toward one of 2 smaller rooms. "What exactly would my duties be?" Cooking, cleaning, mending. He moved to the fireplace and stirred the pot. Basic housekeeping. The silence stretched between them. The pay, she said finally. The man in town mentioned the pay would be generous. Silas glanced at her over his shoulder. $50 a month, plus room and board, paid at the end of your service. Ilara felt her knees go weak. $50 a month was more than most women could earn in a year. It was enough to start a new life. It was also far too much for simple housekeeping. That is very generous, she said carefully. What exactly would I be expected to do for such wages? Silas turned back to the fire, his shoulders tense. Keep the cabin clean and warm, prepare meals, and tend to any visitors that might come calling. Visitors? Ilara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. What kind of visitors? The kind that prefer their business conducted away from town. He ladled stew into a wooden bowl and held it out to her. You will not ask questions about who they are or what they want. You will feed them if they are hungry, tend their wounds if they are hurt, and forget they were ever here once they leave. Ilara accepted the bowl, her hands trembling. What kind of wounds? She asked. Silas sat across from her. The kind that come from living hard and making difficult choices. She set down her spoon, her appetite gone. You are asking me to aid criminals. I am asking you to do a job. He met her gaze steadily. There are rules here, Mrs. Vance. Simple ones. You do not ask questions. You do not judge. You do not speak of what you see to anyone, ever. In return, you are paid well and protected from whatever troubles you left behind. The word protected sent another chill through her. As if reading her thoughts, Silas continued. The trail down the mountain becomes impassable once the heavy snows start. After that, there is no leaving until spring. Ilara looked toward the window where snow was beginning to fall. She would be trapped here for at least 5 months. Trapped with a man who harbored fugitives. But where else could she go? I understand, she said quietly. After a restless night filled with the sounds of the growing storm, Ilara woke before dawn to the smell of coffee. Silas was already preparing to leave, a heavy coat on his back and a rifle slung over his shoulder. There is oatmeal in the pantry, he said without looking at her. I should be back by evening. He paused at the door. Remember what I told you about visitors, Mrs. Vance. Feed them, tend them, and ask no questions. Your life may depend on it. Then he was gone, leaving Ilara alone in the quiet cabin. She spent the morning exploring her new home. The pantry and root cellar were impressively stocked, not just with staples, but with luxuries like sugar and coffee. The main room contained a few books, including a worn copy of Shakespeare's plays, the pages well thumbed. She was dusting the mantelpiece when she found the photograph, tucked behind a brass candlestick. It showed a woman with dark hair and serious, sad eyes, wearing a dress that was fashionable 5 or 6 years ago. She was beautiful in a quiet way, with delicate features and a gentle smile. Ilara studied the photo, wondering who she was. A wife, a sister? Someone Silas had loved and lost. She was still holding the photograph when she heard the sound of hoofbeats outside. Ilara quickly replaced the picture and moved to the window. Through the falling snow, she could see 2 riders approaching, their horses struggling through the deepening drifts. Both men were heavily armed and rode with the careful alertness of those who expected trouble. Her heart began to pound as she remembered Silas's warnings. A knock came at the door, firm but not aggressive. Ilara took a deep breath and opened it. Ma'am, the taller man touched the brim of his hat. We are looking for Silas Croft. He is not here at present, Ilara said, her voice steady. But he should return by evening. You are welcome to wait. The man studied her for a moment, taking in her pregnant state. Much obliged. I am Caleb Hayes and this is Mateo Reyes. We have business with Mr. Croft. Ilara stepped aside to let them enter, noting the way both men automatically scanned the room, cataloging exits and potential weapons. They moved like predators. Please sit by the fire, she offered. I can get you coffee. Coffee would be welcome, Caleb said, settling into a chair with a slight grimace that suggested old injuries. Mateo remained standing, positioning himself where he could watch both the door and the windows. His dark eyes missed nothing. You are new here, Caleb observed. Silas usually works alone. I am his housekeeper for the winter, Ilara replied, pouring coffee. Mrs. Ilara Vance. Vance, Caleb repeated, accepting the cup. You wouldn't be related to Richard Vance, the banker from Silver Creek? Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. You knew my husband. Of him. Caleb sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. Word travels fast when a man dies owing money to the wrong people. The cup in Ilara's hand began to tremble. What do you mean? Your husband was not just a banker, Mrs. Vance. He was also a gambler, and not a very good one. When he died, he left behind debts to some very unforgiving men. Men who might be inclined to collect from his widow if they knew where to find her. Ilara sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. She had known Richard gambled, but she had never imagined it was with criminals. How much? She whispered. $5,000, Caleb's voice was matter-of-fact. Plus interest. The kind of debt that doesn't go away just because the debtor dies. $5,000. It might as well have been $5 million. She would never be able to raise such a sum. I see you understand the situation, Caleb continued. Which makes me curious about what you are doing up here, so far from civilization. Running, perhaps? I needed work. Ilara forced herself to meet his gaze. Mr. Croft offered employment. $50 a month, I would imagine. Caleb smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Silas always did pay well for services rendered. The question is, what services is he expecting from you? Before Ilara could answer, Mateo spoke for the first time, his voice a low rumble. Riders coming. Caleb was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. 2 men, he reported, armed. They don't look like law, but they don't look friendly either. Ilara joined him, peering through the snow. These men were different from Caleb and Mateo, rougher and more desperate looking. One of them was slumped in his saddle, clutching his arm. Friends of yours? Caleb asked. I have never seen them before. Ilara stepped back, her heart racing again. What should I do? What Silas told you to do, I expect. Caleb returned to his chair, his hand resting near the pistol on his hip. Feed them, tend them, and ask no questions. The new arrivals dismounted clumsily. The knock, when it came, was frantic. Ilara opened the door to find 2 men who looked as if they had been riding hard for days. The wounded one was young, barely out of his teens, with fair hair and frightened eyes. The other was older, with a grizzled beard. Please, the older man said, pushing past Ilara. My boy is hurt bad. We heard Silas Croft might help. He stopped short when he saw Caleb and Mateo, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. The tension in the room crackled. Easy, friend, Caleb said, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of steel. We are all guests here. The wounded young man swayed on his feet, blood seeping through a makeshift bandage. He needs medical attention, Ilara said, moving toward him. Sit him by the fire. She helped the young man to a chair and began examining his injury. The bullet had passed clean through the fleshy part of his upper arm. Posse caught up with us outside Blackstone Gulch, the older man said. I'm Arthur Bell, and this is my son Leo. We've been riding for 3 days. Ilara glanced at Caleb, who nodded slightly. The story was believable enough. She cleaned Leo's wound, trying not to think about what crime might have brought a posse after them. Silas Croft's cabin was clearly some kind of way station for men on the run, a place where questions were not asked and help was provided, for a price. The afternoon wore on, with the 4 men maintaining an uneasy truce while the snow continued to fall, isolating them completely. Ilara prepared a simple meal, moving between the kitchen and the main room, hyper-aware of the undercurrents of suspicion flowing between the 2 groups. Caleb and Mateo were cold professionals, while Arthur and Leo Bell seemed like amateurs who had gotten in over their heads. As evening approached, she began to worry about Silas's return. What would he think when he found his cabin full of strangers? She was setting the table when she heard the distinctive sound of a horse approaching. The conversation in the main room stopped abruptly. All 4 men tensed, reaching for their weapons. That will be Mr. Croft, Ilara said, trying to project a calm she did not feel. Silas entered in a swirl of snow and cold air, stamping his boots. He took in the scene with a single glance, his face unreadable. Gentlemen, he said, his voice carefully neutral, I trust Mrs. Vance has made you comfortable. She has been most hospitable, Caleb replied. They ate in relative silence. Ilara served the meal and then retreated to the kitchen, sensing the men had business to discuss. She couldn't help but overhear fragments of conversation, references to money, territory, law enforcement, and safe passage. It became clear that Silas was more than just a hermit. He was some kind of broker, a man who arranged safe passage and provided services for a price. The realization should have frightened her, but instead she found herself oddly reassured. Silas was a businessman, and as long as she proved useful and kept his secrets, she would likely be safe. After dinner, as the men settled around the fire for serious negotiations, Silas stopped her before she could retire. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "perhaps you could check on young Mr. Bell's bandage." Ilara nodded and moved to examine Leo's wound. The bleeding had stopped, and there were no signs of infection. "It looks good," she reported. "Thank you," Leo said quietly. "You have been very kind to strangers." She was turning to leave when Arthur Bell spoke up. "Mrs. Vance, might I ask how long you have been working for Mr. Croft?" "This is my first day," Ilara replied truthfully. "Ah," Arthur exchanged a glance with Caleb. "Then you have not yet learned all the rules of the house." "What rules?" Ilara asked, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. Silas stood up, his expression hard. "That is enough, Bell. Mrs. Vance knows what she needs to know." But Arthur wasn't finished. "Does she know about the previous housekeepers? Does she know why none of them lasted the winter?" The cabin fell silent. Ilara looked from Arthur to Silas, trying to read the truth in their faces. "What happened to the previous housekeepers?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Silas's jaw tightened, but it was Caleb Hayes who answered, his voice matter-of-fact and utterly without emotion. "They died, Mrs. Vance, all of them. Some from the cold, some from accidents, and some from the kind of men who don't like witnesses to their business." Ilara sank into the nearest chair, the room spinning around her. "That is enough," Silas said, his voice a low warning. "Mrs. Vance is under my protection. The same rules the others followed?" Arthur asked with a cruel smile. "How did that work out for them?" Mateo spoke for only the second time that day, his voice quiet, but carrying absolute authority. "Bell, you will stop talking now, or I will stop you permanently." Arthur subsided, but the damage was done. Ilara looked at the men around her, each one capable of violence. She thought of the photograph of the woman with the sad eyes. Had she been one of them? Had she died here in this cabin? "I need some air," Ilara said, standing abruptly and moving toward the door. She stepped out into the storm, gasping as the cold air hit her lungs. The snow was falling so heavily she could barely see the outbuildings. She was trapped here until spring, alone with violent men and a host with a history of dead employees. Her child would be born in this place, far from any doctor, surrounded by criminals. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until a hand fell on her shoulder. She spun around to find Silas, a heavy coat draped over his arm. "You will freeze to death out here," he said, wrapping it around her. "Maybe that would be better," she replied. He was quiet for a moment. "The women who died here," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "They were not like you. They were running from different things, and they made different choices." "What kind of choices?" "The kind that put them in danger." Silas turned to look at her, and in the dim light, she could see regret in his eyes. "I cannot protect someone who insists on trusting the wrong people." Ilara thought of the photograph again. "What was her name?" Silas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he spoke, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Isabel. She was my wife." The words hit Ilara like a physical blow. The woman in the photograph had been his wife, and she had died here. "What happened to her?" He turned away, staring into the storm. "She trusted the wrong man, believed his promises. When I found her, it was too late." Tears froze on Ilara's cheeks. How many women had died in this place? But even as the questions tormented her, she knew she had no choice but to stay. "I understand," she said finally. "Do you?" Silas looked at her again, the weight of old grief in his eyes. "Because once the snows close the passes, there will be no leaving, no matter what you see or hear." Ilara pulled the coat tighter and looked back at the cabin. Her past had followed her even to this remote place. There would be no escaping it. "Then I will have to make sure I am not just a witness," she said. Weeks passed, settling into an uneasy routine. The blizzard had left behind a world of blinding white, and the isolation that had initially frightened Ilara began to feel like a blessing. Here she was free from the judgment of civilized society. She was simply Ilara Vance, housekeeper to a mountain man, and that identity felt more honest than any she had worn in years. But the peace could not last. It was 3 weeks after the night of the gunfight when Jenna Thorne arrived at the cabin. Ilara saw her from the kitchen window, a small figure struggling through the snow on foot. Silas was away checking his traps, and Ilara faced a dilemma. His rules were clear: do not open the door to strangers when he was not present. But the woman outside was clearly in distress, and to leave her would be a death sentence. Ilara opened the door. Jenna was young, probably no more than 20, with fair hair and haunted blue eyes that Ilara recognized from her own mirror. "Please," Jenna said as she stumbled inside. "I need help. I've been walking for 2 days." Ilara helped her to a chair by the fire. As she prepared tea, she studied her unexpected visitor. Jenna was clearly running from something. "What brings you up the mountain in winter?" Ilara asked. "The same thing that brought you, I expect," Jenna whispered. "I have nowhere else to go." "How do you know about me?" "Word travels." Jenna sipped the soup Ilara gave her. "They say Silas Croft pays well for housekeeping and doesn't ask too many questions." It was the same story, from the same bartender. But something in Jenna's tone felt wrong. "What are you running from?" Ilara asked directly. Jenna stared into the fire. "My husband. It turned out he already had a wife and children. When I confronted him, he tried to kill me. I fought back and left him badly injured. The law thinks I'm the one who committed a crime." Ilara felt a kinship with the young woman, but she also thought of Silas's warnings about trust. She thought of Isabel, who had died alone in this place. Perhaps if she'd had another woman to help her, she might have survived. "You can stay until Mr. Croft returns," Ilara said finally. "But the decision will have to be his." When Silas returned, his displeasure was immediate. His pale eyes took in Jenna's presence with a cold assessment of the risk she represented. Ilara explained Jenna's story, but Silas was unmoved. "Miss Thorne," he said, "I am sorry for your troubles, but this is not a refuge for every woman with nowhere else to go." "Please, Mr. Croft," Jenna pleaded. "I have nowhere else to go. I can work hard." Silas studied her for a long moment. "You can stay until the weather clears enough for safe travel," he conceded. "But this is a temporary arrangement." That evening, after Jenna had retired, Silas pulled Ilara aside. "You should not have let her stay," he said quietly. "We don't know anything about her or who might be following her. She was freezing to death outside our door. What else could I do? You could have followed the rules I established for your protection." His voice carried a note of anger. "Rules that exist because this place attracts dangerous people." Ilara felt her own anger rising. "Like the rules that protected Isabel?" The words hung in the air. Silas's face went still, old pain flickering in his eyes. "That is different," he said. "Is it?" Ilara pressed on. "Or is it just more convenient to blame the victim than to admit you could not protect her?" Silas turned away. "Isabel died because she trusted the wrong person," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Because she believed someone who promised to help her, and that person betrayed her to the men who were hunting her. I think Miss Thorne arrived here with a very convenient story at a very convenient time, and I think you should be very careful about what you say in front of her." The warning proved prophetic. Over the next few days, Ilara noticed things about Jenna. The way she seemed to know the cabin's layout too well. The way she asked seemingly innocent questions about Ilara's background and Silas's business. The most disturbing moment came one night when Ilara woke to find Jenna gone from her makeshift bed. She lay still, listening, and eventually heard the soft creak of floorboards from the main room. Jenna was moving around in the darkness, searching for something. The next morning, Ilara told Silas. His reaction was immediate and chilling. "Pack your things," he said. "We are leaving tonight." "Leaving? But where can we go?" "There is another cabin higher up in the mountains, a place I keep for emergencies. We will be safe there." As they slipped out into the darkness, leaving Jenna sleeping by the fire, Ilara knew their sanctuary was no longer secure. The journey to the emergency shelter was a brutal trek through treacherous terrain. The cabin, when they reached it, was a primitive shelter built into the side of a cliff, designed for concealment, not comfort. Trapped there, the confinement took its toll, and tensions grew between them. It was during their second week there that Ilara, searching for blankets, found a bundle of letters. They were from Isabel to Silas. Reading them, Ilara learned the devastating truth. Isabel had not been a housekeeper. She was Silas's lover, a married woman trying to escape a violently abusive husband. She had come to Silas for help, but she wanted more than just shelter. She wanted him to kill her husband. When Silas refused, she had returned to the city to do it herself, but her husband discovered her plan and killed her first, making it look like an accident. "I let her go," Silas confessed to Ilara that night, his voice filled with a pain that made her heart ache. "I knew she was planning something desperate, and I let her walk out that door anyway. I was afraid of what helping her might cost me." He then revealed the final, terrible secret. "I used to work for them," he said quietly. "The syndicate. Before I came to these mountains, I was one of their enforcers. I helped them collect debts and eliminate problems." He had fled that life after refusing an order to kill an innocent family. And Isabel's abusive husband, the man who murdered her. "His name is Julian Thorne," Silas said. "He's the leader of the entire syndicate. And Jenna Thorne, the woman you let into our home, is his agent sent to find us." The attack came at dawn. 4, maybe 5 men, moving with military precision, had found their emergency shelter. Jenna gave them detailed information about this place, Silas said, his voice grim. They were forced to run, escaping through a concealed door into a maze of caves behind the cabin. The journey through the underground passages was a nightmare of cold stone and absolute darkness, but Silas led them with sure steps. They emerged on the far side of the mountain and made a grueling trek to an abandoned mining camp. They were now true fugitives hunted by professional killers. It was there that Ilara discovered the final piece of the puzzle. Her husband hadn't just been a gambler. He was a courier for the syndicate. When he died, a ledger containing documents that could destroy Julian Thorne's entire empire disappeared with him. That was why they were hunting her. Not for the money, but for the information her husband had hidden. Just as they were planning their next move, the syndicate's killers, led by Jenna, tracked them to the mining camp and surrounded them. A desperate firefight erupted. "Go!" Silas shouted. "Get to the mine." "I'll hold them here." Ilara slipped out the back and into the howling storm, making her way to the dark mouth of the mine entrance. She plunged into the blackness, feeling her way along the rough stone walls. Behind her she could hear the sounds of fighting, then voices echoing through the tunnels as her pursuers followed. They had torches and were moving faster than she could. In a small side passage, her hands found a hidden door. It opened into a large furnished underground chamber, a fully equipped syndicate headquarters. And there, waiting for her, was Jenna Thorne. "Hello, Ilara," Jenna said, a pistol held with easy familiarity. "I was wondering when you would find this place." Jenna revealed the full scope of the deception. The cabin had just been a cover. "And Mr. Croft is dead," she added with casual indifference. He served his purpose. Just as Jenna was about to kill her, new voices echoed through the tunnels. It was Caleb Hayes and Mateo Reyes. "Right on schedule," Jenna smirked, anticipating the ambush she had set. But Ilara made her choice. She threw herself at the chamber's only lantern, plunging the room into darkness. "It's a trap," she screamed. In the chaotic firefight that followed, Caleb and Mateo, warned by Ilara, gained the upper hand. When the shooting stopped, Jenna was dead. "Silas is alive," Mateo told a stunned Ilara. "Wounded but alive. He's waiting for us." Ilara realized she held the key, the location of the documents. She devised an audacious plan. She would go to Denver alone, retrieve the papers from a trunk in her old landlord's basement, and use them as a bargaining chip. In Denver, she found the documents along with a final letter from her husband. In it, he confessed everything and revealed he had arranged for Silas to protect her. But she was captured and brought before the man himself, Julian Thorne. In a tense negotiation, Ilara bluffed, claiming she had copies and the originals were safe. Just as Thorne discovered her deception, Silas, Caleb, and Mateo stormed the warehouse where she was being held. Thorne escaped in the chaos. They knew he would never stop hunting them. "Then we don't hunt him," Ilara said, her voice steel. "We make him come to us." They used the real documents as bait, luring Thorne to a final confrontation at an abandoned church. In the tense standoff, Ilara made her final, shocking proposal. She wouldn't destroy the documents or have him killed. She offered him the chance to fake his own death and disappear forever, in exchange for dismantling his entire criminal organization. Stunned and seeing no other way out, Thorne accepted. That night the church burned, and with it, the official story of Marcus Thorne's death. 3 days later, Ilara stood on the platform of the Denver train station. Beside her was Silas, his own ticket in hand. "My place is with you and your child," he said quietly, "if you will have me." As the train pulled away from the city, Alara watched the mountains disappear. The long winter was finally over. Dorothy Ross, a pregnant widow, was traveling west to start fresh in California, carrying with her nothing but hope, her newborn child, and the man who had chosen to share her uncertain future. If you enjoyed Alara's journey from desperation to survival, please show your support by liking this video, leaving a comment, and subscribing for more stories that explore the depths of the human spirit. You can check out my other videos in the playlist here. Your support is what keeps this channel going, and I can't wait to share the next story with you.